did do a couple of months ago is she sponsored an educational session with one of her friends who is a quilter and so forth, and they did quilting a burial shroud. We had 10 women, they were all women, and it was a great activity and so forth, and it just got people thinking. So a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, we did a presentation, thank you, at the Farley Center, because we try to do educational sessions at least once a month. They're free. And sometimes it's about death-related things, and sometimes not. But my presentation was about, guess what, natural burials. And I asked people, why were they interested, why did they come? And this is another example of the diversity of why this resonates for so many people. One person said, I love nature. This just seems to be a natural way to sort of pass and to be buried. Another one says, I like the idea of my soul in touch with the soil. My soul in touch with the soil. Another one just said, I like the simplicity of it. Another participant said, putting a vault in the ground is disgusting. I added the emphasis. And another person who participated in that training said, I like the idea of being buried in my favorite pajamas. Now, you could probably do that in the conventional sort of burials as well, but you know, they usually do suits and all kinds of things. So, if you're ready with PowerPoint, I'll go through a little of our slides. But as what Selena said and others and so forth, it is about choice, and so we do try to give families options. And I'm not aware of anyone being dressed in their favorite pajamas yet, but I guess it could happen. So again, as I said, we're a nature preserve burial ground located on the grounds of the Farley Center in Verona, Wisconsin. A total of 25 acres dedicated to the Natural Path Sanctuary. Okay. We're very intimately related because although we're incorporated separately because the IRS doesn't like you operating a cemetery and calling yourself a 501c3. So we created the Farley Center as a nonprofit 501c3, which is an educational and charitable organization, and we do training and programs and so forth. And then we developed the nonprofit cemetery, which is a 501c13 for the attorneys in the audience here and accountants. So we're very much interrelated, and our theme is to create a sustainable legacy, and that legacy all started with Dr. Linda Farley and her husband, Dr. Gene Farley. Linda died in 2009, and her sons and her husband got together and said, we want to do something that will honor her, and so they put together this concept, and this is some of the themes. You can go to the next one. Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no sustainability. And without sustainability, there is no future. And although it's attributed to Dr. Gene Farley, he says really it should be attributed to all of his sons, because a lot of this planning for this center and for the Natural Path Sanctuary has been the work of many people, and it's his sons and himself that kind of came up to try to encapsulate what's this all about? How does peace, justice, and sustainability all fit together? So, Linda died in 2009. Jean wasn't sure if she could be buried on their property. As many of you may or may not know, there are no state laws that prevent you from being buried on your own land. There are no, usually, county laws. But you have to check with your local zoning entity and so forth, because most of the time in the city of Madison, they really don't want you being buried in your backyard. So in many cities and urban areas, there are going to be zoning restrictions and so forth. So you need to check with your zoning entity. So out in the town of Springdale, we checked with the town of Springdale, and when Linda died, Gene wasn't quite sure about all the legalities. I talked with him a little bit before that, but he checked with the town clerk, and the town clerk says, Gene, I don't know the answer to that, but I will look into it for you. And she checked with the DNR, and she checked with the coroner's office, also known as the medical examiner's office, and she checked with one other entity, I think, at the county level, and she found there were no restrictions, as long as they weren't on a floodplain, and they're not. And she said that the medical examiner's office asked to make sure that they had some coordinates for her gravesite and so forth. I've never read that in the state law that that's absolutely required when you bury on your own private property, but so there are a lot of people, farmers and other people of rural land, who talk about this. One of the drawbacks of being buried on your own property, though, is that that property is not designated as cemetery. It's not protected in perpetuity. If you're buried in a cemetery, you've got the protection of that land being respected and held sacred in perpetuity. So if you're buried on your own property and you sell it 3 generations down the road, you never know what they're going to do with it. It might end up being a Walmart parking lot. Okay. The family was motivated to do this and bury her on her own land. The cemetery hadn't been created yet, so her burial site, her grave site actually is right near the house. It's not part of our cemetery, as it turns out. But they wanted to create this nature preserve so the land could be protected, and this was a way to do that. And they wanted to have a revenue source so that when people get buried, that there is some money to help support the center. And I'll talk about that in a second. Okay. We've talked about this in terms of that we're preserving the land, and it's a way to certainly for people to enjoy nature, to feel more connected to the whole cycle of life. It's certainly in most situations, maybe not always, but most, a more affordable option. And in our situation, the Nature Preserve Cemetery allows for educational research opportunities. Okay? We do not bury throughout the whole 25 acres. We don't bury where there's a tree. We don't bury where there's a path. We don't bury where there's a pond. We don't bury where there's a steep slope and so forth. So it's limited areas that we do concentrated sort of burials. We don't allow the embalming and the vaults, as you've heard. That's pretty typical. We prefer shrouds, although we will allow a simple wooden casket that are available in this area. And we're not using any above ground markers. We still have some discussion to do in terms of temporary markers. So we had a family with an infant that was buried there. They wanted to have a stone. They took a stone from our property, and the person said, who does the engraving, "Oh, this is soft stone, this is sandstone, this is no good, it's like Swiss cheese when you cut into it." So they didn't want to use our stone. So we were a little hurt, but we've been talking with this family, and we'll probably come up with sort of a compromise where they will place a stone for a couple of years and then possibly remove it, or might incorporate it into a stone wall. So we're looking for their needs to have the spot marked for a few years, but our needs of not having stones impede sort of the normal sort of appearance of the land. Okay, next. We've done all hand-dug graves. We've had 2 adult full-body burials. We had 1 infant burial and 1 cremains placement. So we've had a total of 4. I've dug 3 graves. So we had 2 adult burials. How did you do 3? Well, the family helped us with one of our graves. They actually did most of the work. This gentleman came out with 5 of his friends. It was a very powerful experience for them. So our graves currently are all hand-dug. We do not go down 5.5 feet. Thank goodness. We go down 3 feet minimum. Okay. Shrouding is permitted. There's commercial shrouds available and homemade shrouds available. Okay, next. Next. So